The fastest way to lose an opportunity is to believe you already know someone's worth. Marcus Reed repeated those words quietly in his mind as he stepped out of the city bus and looked across the entrance of Hawthorne Automotive Group's annual luxury showcase. Rows of polished sports cars reflected the afternoon sun, photographers crowded the red carpet, and elegantly dressed guests admired vehicles worth more than most families would earn in a lifetime. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his neatly pressed but well-worn navy jacket and carefully touched the cream-colored invitation that had arrived 3 days earlier. It carried the signature of William Hawthorne himself, inviting Marcus to attend the company's Young Innovators reception. It was the first invitation of its kind Marcus had ever received. His automotive engineering teacher had secretly nominated him after watching the teenager spend 2 years restoring old engines in the school's vocational workshop and volunteering every Saturday at a neighborhood community garage. Marcus smiled to himself before walking toward the entrance with quiet confidence. Before he could present his invitation, the keys to a silver luxury coupe suddenly landed in his hands. Finally, an impatient guest said without making eye contact, "Take this to the front valet section. Be careful with the paint." Marcus looked down at the key, then back at the guest, who had already turned away to greet friends. For a brief moment, he considered explaining that he was attending as an invited guest. Instead, he calmly carried the vehicle to the designated parking area, adjusted the driver's seat back exactly as he had found it, centered the steering wheel, and carefully returned the key. A valet supervisor watched with surprise. Most temporary attendants rushed through their work. Marcus treated every vehicle as though it belonged in a museum. Within minutes, another guest tossed him another key, assuming he worked there as well. Soon another followed. Laughter drifted through small groups of wealthy attendees as someone joked that the teenager seemed eager to earn extra tips. Marcus heard every comment but answered none of them. His grandmother had often reminded him that dignity could never be taken away unless he willingly surrendered it. High above the showroom floor, inside a glass office overlooking the entire event, William Hawthorne quietly observed everything through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Beside him stood the event operations director, who frowned after watching another guest casually hand Marcus a third luxury car key. "Should we correct the misunderstanding?" she asked. William folded his arms thoughtfully. "Not yet," he replied. "I would like to see what happens when a young man's character is tested before anyone knows who he really is." Down below, Marcus finished parking another immaculate automobile before carefully wiping a small fingerprint from the driver's door using the microfiber cloth left inside the vehicle. He smiled politely as he returned the key, never expecting recognition. At that exact moment, the operations manager approached carrying the key to the rarest collector car in the entire exhibition. With a measured expression, he extended it toward Marcus and quietly said, "One more car. Let us see how carefully you handle this one." Marcus Reed accepted the polished collector car key with both hands, not because he believed he was responsible for parking another luxury vehicle, but because he believed every task deserved respect until the truth became clear. The operations manager watched him carefully without revealing that this moment had been planned hours earlier. From the glass office above, William Hawthorne remained silent, his attention fixed on the young man walking toward the centerpiece of the exhibition. The automobile waiting beneath the showroom lights was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen outside a museum. Its deep midnight blue finish reflected every spotlight with flawless precision, while a small display plaque identified it as one of only 3 surviving handcrafted prototypes ever built by Hawthorne Automotive Group. Guests gathered nearby, admiring its rarity while quietly assuming the teenager had been trusted only to move it a few feet. Marcus approached the driver's door but did not immediately unlock it. Instead, he slowly walked around the entire vehicle. He examined the tires, glanced beneath the front bumper, and paused beside the left front wheel. Then he crouched slightly, listening. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. He leaned closer for another moment before standing again. Rather than inserting the key, Marcus stepped backward. The operations manager frowned. "Is there a problem?" Marcus answered respectfully. "I believe there might be. I heard a faint metallic vibration near the front suspension. It may be nothing, but I do not think this car should be started until someone checks it." A nearby guest laughed loudly enough for several others to hear. "That is impressive," he joked. Now the valet thinks he is the chief engineer. More laughter followed. Another guest smiled sarcastically. Perhaps next he will appraise the collection. Marcus did not react. He simply held the key carefully in both hands. I could be mistaken, he said calmly. But if I am responsible for touching this vehicle, I should also be responsible for protecting it. The operations manager crossed his arms. The engineering team inspected every car this morning, he replied. You are delaying the program. Marcus nodded politely. Then I apologize for the delay. I still do not believe it should be started. The conversation attracted more attention as photographers lowered their cameras and guests drifted closer. High above the showroom, William Hawthorne finally turned toward his chief engineer. Please inspect the prototype exactly where it is, he said quietly. Within moments, the senior engineer arrived carrying diagnostic equipment. He connected a compact testing device beneath the front suspension and remained silent while reviewing the readings. Nearly a minute passed before he slowly looked up. He is correct, the engineer announced. A mounting bracket has developed slight movement. Starting the engine could have placed unnecessary stress on the assembly. The showroom fell completely silent. Several guests who had laughed moments earlier exchanged embarrassed glances. Marcus looked genuinely surprised that his concern had been confirmed. He had never expected recognition. He had only wanted to avoid risking damage to a remarkable automobile. At that moment, the glass office door opened above the showroom, and William Hawthorne began walking calmly down the grand staircase, his eyes never leaving the quiet teenager, still standing respectfully beside the untouched collector car with the key resting carefully in his open hand. William Hawthorne descended the sweeping staircase without urgency, yet every conversation inside the showroom came to an immediate stop. Employees straightened their posture, guests stepped aside, and photographers instinctively lowered their cameras. Marcus Reed remained exactly where he was, still holding the collector car key in both hands. He had no idea the man approaching him was the founder of the company whose engines he had admired since childhood. William stopped beside the midnight blue prototype and rested one hand lightly on its polished fender before looking directly at Marcus. Tell me exactly what you heard, he said calmly. Marcus answered without hesitation. A faint metallic vibration near the left front suspension. It was subtle, but it sounded different from normal movement. I was afraid starting the engine might make it worse. William nodded thoughtfully before turning toward the chief engineer. Would you explain the inspection results to everyone here? The engineer adjusted his glasses before speaking. The mounting bracket supporting part of the suspension assembly had developed a slight amount of movement. It was not visible during our visual inspection, but it became noticeable when pressure shifted across the front wheel. If the car had been driven repeatedly this afternoon, unnecessary strain could have damaged an irreplaceable handcrafted component. A wave of quiet surprise moved across the showroom. The same guests who had laughed only minutes earlier now looked at Marcus with entirely different expressions. William looked back toward the teenager. Have you received formal engineering training? Marcus smiled modestly. No, sir. Only vocational classes at school and many weekends repairing older cars with volunteers at our neighborhood community garage. William seemed genuinely interested. Who taught you to pay attention to details that everyone else overlooks? Marcus thought for a moment before answering. My grandfather repaired farm equipment for almost 40 years. He always told me that machines speak before they fail. You only have to respect them enough to listen. William smiled quietly. That may be one of the wisest engineering lessons I have heard in many years. The operations manager who had handed Marcus the collector car key stepped forward looking slightly uncomfortable. Mr. Hawthorne, he admitted, this entire situation began because our guests assumed Marcus was part of the valet staff. William slowly turned toward the audience. I know, he replied. I watched every moment from my office. An uneasy silence settled across the room. William continued in the same calm voice. I also watched something else. I watched a young man who never complained, never argued, and never allowed disrespect to change the quality of his work. He looked toward Marcus again. When someone handed you car keys without asking who you were, why did you not simply correct them? Marcus answered honestly. Because proving I deserved respect seemed less important than choosing to give it first. Those words lingered in the quiet showroom. William reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and removed the cream-colored invitation Marcus had never presented. You were invited here today as my guest, he said. Your automotive engineering teacher sent me a portfolio of your restoration projects several weeks ago. I wanted to meet the young man behind that remarkable work." Marcus stared at the invitation in surprise before quietly saying, "I thought no one had even read it." William smiled warmly. "I did far more than read it. I designed today around it. But there is still one final part of this evening that nobody here knows about, and it begins with a key that has opened every important chapter of my own life." William Hawthorne slowly reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and removed a polished metal key, unlike any Marcus Reed had ever seen. It was slightly larger than an ordinary automobile key, crafted from brushed stainless steel, with the Hawthorne crest engraved across its surface. Every employee inside the showroom immediately recognized it. Several exchanged astonished glances, while longtime engineers instinctively stood a little straighter. William held the key in the palm of his hand before looking toward Marcus with quiet confidence. "This is not the key to a single automobile," he said. "It is the master key. It opens every secured workshop, every engineering laboratory, every historical collection, and every private garage owned by Hawthorne Automotive Group." The showroom became completely silent. Marcus looked from the key to William, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. William smiled gently. "For more than 30 years, I have handed this key to only 4 people." Curious whispers spread among the guests. One executive quietly admitted to another that even most senior company leaders had never touched it. William continued, "People often assume I give opportunities to those with the most impressive resumes. The truth is much simpler. I look for people whose character remains steady when nobody believes they matter." He glanced around the room, allowing every guest to remember how Marcus had been treated only an hour earlier. "Today, many of you believed this young man belonged in the parking area because of how he looked. None of you asked why he was here. None of you asked what he knew. Yet while others judged appearances, Marcus protected a vehicle worth millions of dollars by refusing to ignore something that did not feel right." William turned back toward Marcus. "Do you know why I remained upstairs instead of correcting everyone immediately?" Marcus respectfully shook his head. William answered with calm honesty. "Because talent can be discovered through interviews. Skill can be measured through examinations. Integrity can only be discovered when someone believes no reward is waiting." Those words settled over the entire showroom. Marcus lowered his eyes for a brief moment before speaking. "Sir, I only did what I believed was right. Anyone who respected those cars should have done the same." William smiled. "That answer tells me more than any application ever could." He gently placed the master key into Marcus's open hand. The cool metal rested there for only a second before Marcus instinctively tried to return it. "I cannot accept something this important," he said sincerely. William quietly closed Marcus's fingers around the key. "You are not accepting ownership," he replied. "You are accepting responsibility." Several guests who had laughed earlier now watched with genuine admiration. The operations manager looked visibly humbled, while the chief engineer smiled with unmistakable approval. William then walked toward a large steel wall at the rear of the showroom where no ordinary visitor had ever been allowed. Near the center was a discreet electronic lock hidden within the polished surface. William looked back at Marcus. "Only one person can open this door now." Marcus stared at the master key resting in his hand. William nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. Behind this door is not the most valuable collection of cars in our company. It is the place where we decide who will build the future of this company, and tonight, that future begins with your first step inside." Marcus Reed looked down at the master key resting in his hand before taking a slow breath. The polished metal felt surprisingly heavy, not because of its weight, but because of everything it represented. He walked toward the hidden electronic lock exactly as William Hawthorne had instructed, stopping just inches from the smooth steel wall. The showroom remained perfectly silent. Hundreds of eyes followed every movement. Marcus carefully inserted the master key into the concealed slot. A soft electronic tone echoed through the room, followed by the quiet sound of powerful locking mechanisms disengaging one after another. The enormous steel door slowly opened, revealing a spacious private engineering gallery unlike anything displayed in the public showroom. Instead of bright promotional lighting and polished presentation stages, the room contained handcrafted prototypes, historical concept vehicles, engineering workstations, and framed photographs documenting decades of innovation. Along one wall stood the very first sports car William Hawthorne had personally restored as a young mechanic before founding his company. Another corner displayed unfinished experimental vehicles beside notebooks filled with handwritten design sketches. Marcus stepped inside slowly, careful not to touch anything without permission. William followed beside him with a quiet smile. "Most visitors believe our greatest treasures are the cars displayed outside," he said. "They are mistaken. Everything in this room represents mistakes corrected, lessons learned, and people who chose honesty when shortcuts would have been easier." Marcus listened carefully while admiring the workshop. "It feels different from the showroom," he admitted. William nodded. "Because this room was never built to impress customers. It was built to remind engineers that every great machine begins with responsibility." They stopped beside an old wooden workbench worn smooth by decades of use. Resting upon it were simple hand tools that looked almost ordinary compared to the priceless automobiles surrounding them. William gently placed one hand on the bench. "These belong to my father. He taught me that every mechanic eventually faces a choice. You can protect your reputation by hiding a problem, or you can protect another person's safety by telling the truth." Marcus immediately understood why William had watched him so carefully earlier that afternoon. "The collector car was never the real test," he said quietly. William smiled. "No, the car simply gave you an opportunity to reveal the kind of engineer you already are." Behind them, several senior engineers and executives entered the private gallery after receiving William's permission. None interrupted the conversation. They simply observed with respectful attention. William then removed a thin leather folder from a nearby cabinet and handed it to Marcus. Inside was an official internship agreement with Hawthorne Automotive Group beginning immediately after Marcus graduated from high school. The program included engineering mentorship, paid technical training, college tuition assistance, and direct access to the company's research division. Marcus looked up in disbelief. "Sir, there are students with better grades and far more experience than I have." William answered without hesitation. "There may be students with higher scores. There may even be students with greater technical knowledge today. But knowledge can be taught. Character cannot. This company has always been built by people who refuse to compromise their integrity, even when nobody is watching." Marcus carefully closed the folder, still overwhelmed by the opportunity before him. Outside the gallery, the guests waited quietly, unaware that William had one final announcement prepared, one that would not only change Marcus's future, but permanently change how Hawthorne Automotive Group would choose every young leader from that day forward. William Hawthorne and Marcus Reed walked back into the main showroom side by side, leaving the private engineering gallery behind them. The massive steel door closed quietly, but the silence throughout the building remained. Every guest could see that something extraordinary had happened beyond that hidden entrance. Marcus still held the master key in one hand and the leather internship folder in the other. Yet his expression remained exactly the same as when he had first arrived that afternoon. Calm, respectful, grateful. William noticed it immediately and smiled. "The most important thing I hoped would remain unchanged today has remained exactly the same," he said. Marcus looked at him with quiet curiosity. "What do you mean, sir?" William answered. "You were humble before anyone noticed you, and you are still humble after everyone knows your name. That tells me I made the right decision." The audience listened carefully as William stepped onto the presentation platform normally reserved for unveiling new vehicles. Instead of introducing another luxury automobile, he addressed the hundreds of guests gathered throughout the showroom. "Every year," he began, "our company receives thousands of applications from remarkable students, talented engineers, and ambitious young professionals. We carefully review grades, awards, recommendations, and technical achievements. Those accomplishments matter, but today reminded me that they are not enough." He paused and looked toward Marcus. This young man was mistaken for a valet before anyone bothered to ask why he was here. He accepted every assignment with professionalism. He protected a collector vehicle even when others laughed at him. He never demanded respect, yet he never stopped giving it. Several guests lowered their eyes as William continued. "Character is the foundation upon which every lasting achievement is built. Without it, talent eventually loses its value." The operations director stepped forward carrying a small presentation case. William opened it, and removed a polished bronze emblem bearing the hawthorn crest. Beginning next year, he announced, every applicant accepted into our future engineering leadership program will complete a character evaluation before any interview takes place. Technical ability will remain essential, but integrity, humility, responsibility, and respect will become equal qualifications. The announcement surprised even the senior executives standing nearby. They quickly began applauding, followed by engineers, employees, and finally every guest throughout the showroom. William then turned back toward Marcus. You changed more than your own future today, he said. You changed how this company will recognize future leaders for generations. Marcus looked genuinely overwhelmed. I never intended to change anything, he admitted softly. William smiled. The people who change the world rarely begin with that intention. They simply choose the right action when the wrong one would have been easier. At that moment, the guest who had first handed Marcus a luxury car key without looking at him slowly approached the stage. His expression reflected sincere regret rather than embarrassment. Standing before Marcus, he extended his hand. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I judged your appearance before I respected your character. Thank you for teaching me a lesson I should have learned many years ago. Marcus accepted the handshake warmly. We all have opportunities to learn, he replied with a gentle smile. The important part is choosing to grow after we do. William watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, knowing that no engineering breakthrough displayed inside the showroom had ever demonstrated greater strength than the simple dignity standing before him. The applause gradually faded, but the atmosphere inside the Hawthorne showroom had changed in a way no product launch or engineering announcement had ever accomplished. Conversations that had once revolved around horsepower, performance statistics, and market value now centered on integrity, humility, and the young man standing quietly beside William Hawthorne. Marcus Reed still held the master key carefully, almost as though he believed it belonged to someone else. William noticed the expression and smiled. You are wondering whether you deserve to hold it, he said gently. Marcus nodded honestly. Yes, sir. I keep thinking there are people inside this company who have worked here for years. I arrived only a few hours ago. William rested one hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder. You are measuring time. I am measuring character. Those are not always the same thing. Before Marcus could respond, the chief engineer approached carrying a small wooden presentation box. Inside rested an old brass ignition key, its edges worn smooth from decades of use. Unlike the polished master key, this one looked ordinary. William carefully lifted it from the box. This was the first key I ever owned as a mechanic, he explained. 40 years ago, I could not afford expensive tools, but I could always choose to do honest work. The guests listened in complete silence. William continued. Every engineer who helped build this company began with something simple. Not wealth, not influence, just responsibility. He placed the old brass key beside the master key in Marcus's hand. Keep them together. One reminds you where opportunity begins. The other reminds you where integrity can lead. Marcus looked at the two keys with quiet gratitude. I will never forget this day, he said sincerely. William smiled. Good. But I hope you remember the reason behind it more than the recognition itself. At that moment, several senior engineers stepped forward one by one. Instead of congratulating Marcus with formal speeches, they shared brief stories about mistakes they had admitted early in their careers, moments when honesty had protected customers, co-workers, or future projects. Marcus listened carefully to every story. He realized the greatest lesson inside the building had nothing to do with extraordinary automobiles. It was the shared belief that trust was earned one decision at a time. William looked toward the audience once again. Many companies reward results, he said. Results matter, but results built without integrity never last. I would rather delay a project than rush past a warning. I would rather lose a sale than lose someone's trust. His words drew quiet agreement throughout the showroom. Even the guests who had originally mistaken Marcus for a valet now nodded with genuine respect. The operations manager then approached Marcus carrying a company identification badge already prepared with his name beneath the title Engineering Leadership Intern. Marcus accepted it with both hands, still visibly humbled by everything that had happened. William looked toward the employees gathered around them and spoke one final sentence before the evening concluded. Today, every person here witnessed a young man earn our confidence. Tomorrow he begins earning something even more valuable. The opportunity to prove, day after day, that the character which opened this door is strong enough to keep it open for the rest of his life. The official program had nearly reached its conclusion, yet very few guests had moved toward the exits. Instead, they remained gathered throughout the showroom, not because another luxury automobile was about to be unveiled, but because they had become part of a moment that would be remembered far longer than any new model launch. William Hawthorne quietly looked around the room before stepping back to the microphone one final time. "Before we end this evening," he said, "there is one more decision I want every employee, every guest, and every future engineer to hear." The room immediately became silent again. William continued with calm confidence. For many years, Hawthorne Automotive Group selected young leadership candidates through interviews, academic records, and technical competitions. Beginning today, we will add something far more important. Several executives exchanged curious glances. William smiled slightly. Every applicant who hopes to join our engineering leadership program will first complete what we will call the Integrity Challenge. Soft whispers spread across the audience. William explained, "The challenge will not test mathematics, engineering formulas, or mechanical knowledge. Instead, it will place every applicant inside ordinary situations where nobody appears to be watching. We will observe how they treat coworkers, support staff, customers, and complete strangers. Because the future of this company should never be placed into the hands of brilliant people who cannot be trusted." The announcement was followed by genuine applause from employees throughout the showroom. The chief engineer smiled proudly before turning toward Marcus Reed. "You have already completed the first integrity challenge without knowing it even existed," he said warmly. Marcus lowered his head with quiet humility. "I was simply trying to do the right thing," he answered. William nodded. "Exactly. The strongest character never performs for recognition. It behaves the same way whether applause comes or not." At that moment, several young engineering students attending the event approached Marcus. They asked questions about vocational school, repairing old engines, and how he had learned to recognize the unusual vibration inside the collector car. Marcus answered each question patiently, encouraging every student to stay curious, keep learning, and never become embarrassed to ask experienced mechanics for advice. William observed the conversations with satisfaction. He realized Marcus was already becoming the kind of mentor every great company needed. One senior executive quietly approached William and admitted, "I nearly judged him the same way everyone else did when he arrived." William smiled thoughtfully. "Then today has been valuable for all of us." He looked once more toward the guests filling the showroom. "Luxury automobiles can inspire admiration," he said, "but they should never become more valuable than the people who build, protect, and improve them. Machines reflect engineering. Character reflects humanity." Those words lingered throughout the building long after he finished speaking. As the evening came to a close, employees, engineers, students, and guests lined up not to admire another collector car, but to shake Marcus's hand and thank him for reminding them that respect should always be offered before assumptions are made. Marcus accepted every handshake with the same quiet smile he had worn from the moment he stepped off the city bus that afternoon, proving once again that true leadership begins long before anyone decides to recognize it. Several months later, the doors of Hawthorne Automotive Group opened before sunrise as engineers quietly prepared for another day of innovation. The private engineering gallery that had once seemed unreachable now welcomed Marcus Reed every morning as part of the engineering leadership program. Although he carried the same worn backpack he had owned before meeting William Hawthorne, everything inside reflected a new chapter of his life. Engineering textbooks, design notebooks, measuring tools, and pages filled with careful observations had replaced the uncertainty he once carried. Yet one thing had never changed. Before beginning any assignment, Marcus still walked through the main workshop greeting technicians, mechanics, custodians, receptionists, and security officers by name. William noticed that habit every single day. One morning he quietly asked, "After everything that has happened, why do you still arrive 30 minutes early?" Marcus smiled modestly. "Because someone always taught me that if I respect the people who prepare the workplace, I will respect the work itself." William nodded with quiet satisfaction. Months earlier, he had believed he was offering one young man an opportunity. Now he realized Marcus had given something equally valuable back to the entire company. The Integrity Challenge had become a permanent part of Hawthorne Automotive Group. Every applicant now completed practical exercises designed to measure honesty, humility, responsibility, and respect before technical interviews even began. Managers soon noticed an unexpected change. Teams communicated more openly, experienced engineers mentored younger employees more willingly, and workplace trust steadily grew stronger. During the company's annual leadership conference, Williams stood before hundreds of employees and pointed toward a simple display near the entrance. Inside a glass case rested two keys. One was the worn brass ignition key from his first years as a mechanic. The other was the polished master key that had opened the private engineering gallery. Beneath them appeared a small engraved plaque. It read, "Skill may open a career. Character opens every door that truly matters." William explained that the display was not meant to honor a billionaire or celebrate a company. It existed to remind every future engineer that integrity always arrives before achievement. Marcus quietly listened from the audience, still uncomfortable with public attention. After the conference ended, a group of high school students touring the facility gathered around him asking how they could prepare for careers in engineering. Marcus smiled and answered exactly as his grandfather once had. Learn to listen before you try to impress. Machines speak through small details, and people do too. If you learn to respect both, you will never stop learning. As the students thanked him and walked toward the workshops, William stood nearby watching with quiet pride. He realized the master key had never been the greatest gift he could offer. The greatest gift had been recognizing character before the world learned to notice it. Marcus looked across the engineering floor where experienced professionals and young apprentices worked side by side, united by the same values rather than titles. The journey that had begun with strangers assuming he belonged in the parking area had ended with a future built upon trust, humility, and opportunity. Long after remarkable automobiles had been redesigned and new technologies had replaced old ones, the lesson from that extraordinary day continued to guide every person who entered Hawthorne Automotive Group, proving that the strongest engines may power remarkable machines, but only character has the power to drive a meaningful life.